Now the red light's on right now.
It is? Okay. All right. The REC is blinking. Is it blinking?
This side's dark. It's just bright red, so it looks like it's recording on this side.
Okay, I think it is recording. So, hopefully, it's advancing, so.
It's a good sign.
That's a good sign. All right. I want to thank you for allowing me to come to your school and giving me input on Student A. And the reason why that we are here together is because this video is part of the EDU 581 class at Georgetown College. It's called ESL Assessment and Culture, and it's under the direction of Dr. Crystal Brody. So without further ado, let's get started. Thank you once again for coming, and I'd like to first start out with sharing with you about what WIDA is. A World Instructional Design and Assessment. It takes care of, it is the assessment piece for ESL students. The framework is designed to make sure that students that are culturally, linguistically, and with backgrounds, that they need ESL support, that they are learning a second language. So the design of the entire WIDA is to close the gap. Historically, information's been reported about the data for ESL students, and the data has not always been reliable because, as you know, if a student doesn't have fair and equal access to all of the high quality instructional strategies and all the advantages that other peers do, then the data doesn't really tell us anything. And so WIDA, that's one of the purposes. In talking about assessments, there's a couple of very important aspects and issues. One is that that each assessment is reliable, which means it gives consistent results every time it's administered and implemented. So reliability issues could be how it's scored. If there are multiple teachers using an instrument and it could be very subjective, then you won't get the information you need to get. And of course, we know that assessments instruct us as teachers on how to teach. So that reliability has to be there. And if it's not reliable, then you can't really count on that, so it can be modified. In a few minutes, I'll explain to you what I know at this point on how to create some assessments that you can count on them as being reliable and also valid. And the validity issue is very important because it basically is matching what is intended to be measured and assessed and what's actually being measured. And so aligning the what you intend to assess with what's being assessed. And hopefully I'll show you something to help in that regard in just a minute. Now, how ESL students are identified in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the home language survey, as you well know, there are four, at least by law, there are 4 questions, basic questions. There are more that can be implemented, but Kentucky law states at least 4. The 4 are: what are the languages most spoken at home? Which language did your child learn when he or she first began to talk? What language does your child most frequently speak at home? And what language do you speak most frequently with your child? If there's an answer yes to any of those questions, then by Kentucky law, we are required to give support for that ESL student. Now on Student A, you notice I put in a chart here. We were talking about him, and once again, I appreciate so much your input. His WITA scores, which comes from the access test. In kindergarten, he was scoring these scores here, the 100, 139. If you notice the domains across that are tested or assessed, and there's a difference between a test and assessment. You know, a test is one little instrument that's really kind of narrow, and assessment is wide. And so WITA is administered every year to track that progress. But you see that across those domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, you have the various scores. And we all have come to understand that student A is now a second grader, and he is performing at kindergarten level. Isn't that what we all had decided? Based on his WITA scores in 2015, all those scores, with the exception of that reading score, are 1.9, 1.4, 1.7, and 1.7, with an overall composite of 1.9. What does that mean to us? Well, if you look at your inclusion in your packet here on the can-do, the can-dos are descriptors that translate what those 1.9s and 1.4s do. And they are listed across the language domains. So he would be at a level 1, if you can see that, because all of these scores are 1 point whatever, with the exception of the 5. And it's in 2 pages here because this is a can-do descriptor for K through 12. What I've also listed for you to look more specifically, and as we talk about in our schools, to drill down and see even closer, that he's been tested in a cluster and placed in a cluster, a grade level cluster of 1 to 2. And so right behind those can-dos are drilled down descriptors on that grade level cluster. So if we can take a look at that for a moment and see, there are 4 different sheets because of the 4 different domains. And we will take a look at the list that's provided under those different levels, because it's from those goals that we can write some assessments that will make sense. So if you take a look, and I know you help student A with writing, you are student A's speech teacher, and you are student A's ESL teacher, and we had the privilege of talking earlier with student A's homeroom second grade teacher. And so these kind of help provide that support to understanding how assessments will come about. So let's take a look at the listening and the speaking one, which for a speech teacher, and all teachers of course, would help. If student A is on the listening and the speaking part of these, and I'm showing this to the camera so that we can identify these particular forms, is that the speaking, look down there and see if that matches, if you will, what student A is able to do under level 1 entering speaking.
Yeah, it's pretty reliable for him.
I mean, I'd say coming towards the level 2, I see him do for speaking, but
yeah.
Okay, and that
makes sense.
It matches because
1.7.
that 1.7 and 1.9 is going toward that level 2. So taking those as what he can do, and then also there are theories that talk about +1, using that level 2 as a goal setting also. Not to frustrate, but just to challenge, because rigor is also part of maintaining the rigor. In WITA, the standards are based on maintaining that rigor as well as addressing the language needs. So it sounds like that you know student A much better than I, but that the assessments are helping to identify. Take a look at the listening portion as well. In level 1 on that one, would you agree that that is a decent description of what student A can do?
Yeah. I think the hard part for him and for a lot of the other students with getting beyond level 1 in the listening is the carrying out 2 to 3 step oral commands. That's so hard for him and for a lot of the other ones too.
Absolutely.
Like 1 step, okay, but you go to 2 to 3 and it's just tough.
So those are challenges.
Yes.
Let's take a look quickly, since we're in the level 1, excuse me, at the writing. Pardon me. The writing 1.7, is that
fairly accurate? Because I think he's definitely pretty much mastered a lot of the one moving toward the 2.
Yeah.
The one that's probably the hardest for him is the bottom one, where describing people, places, objects from illustrated examples and models. That the description of something would be hard for him at this point without some kind of a probably sentence starter. But the other 3 areas, I could see him moving right toward that area with the sentence starters. Generating like a list of words and using word banks, and then graphic organizers. That's kind of where we are.
What we did today was
now.
using the sentence starter to write, and he did okay. He needed a lot of prompting first.
Right. So I think we're in getting toward level 2 now, but not quite. Right. All to we haven't got them all yet.
That's fantastic. And once again, these WITA scores were January 2015.
Right.
So we're coming on almost a year later, and hopefully that progress will be evident in that assessment again. I found that in looking at these grade level clusters that they are even more descriptive and more helpful than the K through 12 can do.
Very
so
specific.
I wanted to provide those for you. Now let's take a look at the reading for just a moment, if we will, because he scored a 5.0 on that January 2015, and I know that we had a great discussion about some of the reasons that may have happened. And there's also some concerns about what his abilities are. It's so important that we look at that potential, and not to minimize that 5. It could very much be that 5, and his potential was just shining at that point. Take a look at what you think that description of level 5 is for him. Does it match, or is there another one that it seems to be closer fitting for him?
I just know that level 5 does not seem as accurate. We work on identifying main ideas a lot. That's a goal for 2nd grade, and he has a really hard time distinguishing main idea versus supporting detail, getting those concepts.
Figurative
language, as big as a house.
Yeah, that's yes.
He's a very concrete kid, and I just think it would be hard for him to understand figurative language.
And once again, this is for that grade level cluster 1 to 2, so the figurative language would not be as complex as it would be for a general description, and yet perhaps that was a shining moment or some type of something in error with that test, or assessment, the WITA assessment. But maybe how it was administered, so we can talk about reliability and validity of that. At the same time, matching where he is and seeing in possibly January if he matches. Which one, Dr. Palfrey, do you believe?
I have not gotten to listen to him read a whole lot, but just from working with him on the writing and kind of talking with you, I'm seeing 2 and maybe a little bit of 3, like the matching, that bottom one, match phrases and sentences to pictures.
Okay.
I think he needs to do
he
that.
He just did that for me on the model test.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
But see, you get to that next level 4 in that same bullet, and it's distinguished between general and specific language. You're starting
Flower
to get
versus
into that.
rose.
And I think that would be tough for him at this point. And then, like you said, the figurative language. So I'm thinking more somewhere 2 to 3 middle area.
And so, once again, that's great input, because what he can do is what he's able to solidly do. And these other cells, if you will, or levels, can be those challenges to see how close. And I say that because the next thing that I'd like to go over with you, as we've gone over these grade level, is possibly how to write a sample assessment that would make sense. And so we go to, we would take a look. If you can take this out for me, I've done a sample assessment, if you will, that we can go over very briefly here. But looking at the standards and looking at what the students can do is where you begin. The WITA assessments will give you that, and on this creating an ESL assessment, if you take a look, the first thing is to identify a goal. And WITA and TESOL has the goals for the languages that are based on what will help to grow and develop these different areas of language. And so the first one, to use English in a social setting. Students will interact, and they will express, and I know the expression for speech teacher is a concern as well. We talked about some input from the parent as well on that expressive. So taking a look at that goal, and then looking at some of the descriptors, and we'll be identifying something for him to speak and listen to. Writing sample progress indicators, they're SPIs. And so in this case, if you identified that, let's say one bullet says, describe a favorite storybook character, recommend a book to a peer, ask information about questions for personal reasons, or make requests for personal reasons. Those could be goals based on that standard. And so if those are the identified sample progress indicators, which is in our language also target learning targets, then an assessment could be a checklist. And one of the things that WITA, the WITA framework suggests is checklist, rubrics, because those are authentic assessments that really gauge how well a student is doing and sort of captures the progress. So as long as those indicators are matched with that checklist or that rubric, then that would be a great assessment that's going to follow the WITA framework to tighten those and be a valid what you're trying to measure and what's actually being measured. So you administer that. You would be assessing them in both English and Spanish, and that's a recommendation for that. He's a Spanish-speaking student, or whatever language his native language would be in another student's case. The one variation that I wanted to include on here is technology. And I wanted to say that I see so much technology at work in this building with these ESL students. It is amazing. And they, you can see it's very motivating and they love it. One of the things that we were talking about, once again, was his expressive language. And therefore, doing an assessment like this, identifying sample progress indicators, and then coming up with either a rubric or a checklist or something that would mirror that. But also, in just modifying this one, audioboom.com. Are you aware of that technology?
No,
it's for educators.
Too, yeah.
It's a free. I was able to identify several resources in Dr. Brody's class for technology with regard to ESL students. And so Audioboom would allow student A to do a little book talk and recommending what book he liked and why, and then he could listen to that back. And so it could be that motivator, that technology could try to help with that expressive language, which kind of seems to be a concern. I also, behind this, also have listed for you that WIDA provides rubrics for speaking and writing. And so you can see that these are included as rubrics that you could use, that WIDA does use, to try to gauge and write some goals and assessments for him. Along with a whole list of bullets on another piece of paper here that's entitled the performance definitions for the different levels. So those bullets can be part of those tools that you use to write those assessments. Does that make sense? Yeah. I wanted to be helpful in providing these resources for you and trying to think about reliable and valid assessments. And as we move along, one of the main things is culture. In this class, EDU 581 is with WIDA's emphasis on culture. There are so many things about, and I provided you with a map. Our student A is from Honduras, and it is interesting. My research is pretty extensive. I really didn't know a lot about this country until I started to, about a month ago, when I was here doing our interviews. And so we were all trying to figure out, and we knew he was Spanish speaking, but where was his native home for his parents. And so the Honduras, 65% live below the poverty line. The school systems are created to pay for only through the 6th grade. At age 11, most of the children are out of school and they're working in the coffee fields.
Good afternoon, Arnett Elementary. I hope you had a wonderful day today. Have a couple of announcements for you. First, students, you have homework club after school. We have girls basketball right after school today. Okay. And we also have something else. I'm forgetting something. Homework club, girls basketball. Moving ahead, teachers and staff, if you have printed a DESA Mini, it's a Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment, please see me to pick those up after school. We have several of those waiting for you. If you have any other announcements for me, please make sure those get to me one day prior so we can get those on the announcements for morning and afternoon. Don't forget the canned food drive is going on. Teachers, if you haven't made your way to the cafeteria, please do so now. Have a great evening.
All right, this is certainly an authentic assessment in the middle of school. Once again, I appreciate your time. We'll move along for sake of time and for the sake of our student A. Student A, the homeland that his parents are from, I know he was born, he was born here in America, but his family's from a country where, once again, the government pays for only through 6th grade. And once they're 11, they're not in school anymore, unless, of course, they have the means to go to private schools.